Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. So I've started recording, and we've already hashed out our real world gripes and troubles, so we don't need to even address those here, and bring down our listeners who deal with the same crap. So how are you? You're doing all right. I'm doing all right. Did you do any gaming in the last week?
Yeah, Scott actually ran a session of Dungeons and Dragons.
And how did that work out?
It went all right. He kind of deviated from what we were expecting, but then we ended up in the same point. I like the whole thing. We'd have come to this arrangement. We're gonna steal a skyship from the city that collapsed, where all our characters would have started but not met, and we're now all like being scattered across the four winds. And we actually played the sort of that initial thing, and then we got given a mission that we had to do. There was one point. There was this weird. We'd got this kid, and we basically clearly had some sort of special powers because we kept having like time skips. And at one point we messed up, and he rewound time with this thing. We were in the same place, but like sort of 5 minutes forward. But then me and Brian, rather than going, "Oh, we better not make the same mistake again," went, "Oh, I wonder if we could deliberately make the same mistake again and see if it will work." And then we like broke it, because instead of just resetting the time thing, having literally just decided to start a fight with a whole bar full of bad guys, we then ended up in like this sort of void, and we were like, "Oh no, we've broken it." And it actually, Scott had done it on purpose to, like, if we weren't doing what we were meant to be doing, then here was like the fallback thing. And then the kid that we were protecting like disappeared. We were like, "Oh no, is he going to come back, or if we really messed this up?" So it was quite good. He was like, he'd obviously taken some bits from some adventure that he'd bought and linked it in what we wanted, and then come up with this whole other stuff. Yeah, it was good. And then at the end of it, it kind of looked like we've almost going to be the situation where we're just going to be traveling for an unknown reason, but then we're on a ship called the Odyssey. And then we were like, this seems quite like the whole, like a Greek thing. And we're like, "Oh, Scott, I've got that Greek D&D book. Why do we do like a Greek travel?" And then we were playing Ulysses 31 back from the cartoon from the 80s.
Cool.
It was the 80s. So it was good fun. How about you?
Good. No, I'm glad that worked out for you. So I had one of my players, we knew this. He went to the Renaissance festival that is coming through. That's taking place in our area, and so I guess he went up there to get some tights and a lute and a big old like turkey leg or something like that, and walk around and talk in a bad British accent, because that's what everyone did in the Renaissance. I from what I understand, that's what it seems like, at least. So he was gone. So we, instead of playing the 5e game that we've been, I play tested character creation for the world builder game that I'm putting together, and it worked. I found a couple of I found some little hiccups that weren't so much like flat out flaws, like, "Oh my goodness, the foundation is cracked," nothing like that, but some things that I realized I hadn't explained well enough, and a couple of things that I needed to decide and be more clear about, so that it didn't end up outside of what I was expecting or hoping for at the end of character generation. The nice thing is that since I'm not including a voluminous list of talents, I'm using John Carter's, a version of John Carter Amar's talent creation system. You build your own talents. And the idea is they're supposed to be personal. They're supposed to be idiosyncratic. They're not supposed to be off the shelf. And the spirit of what I was trying to go for, that I presented through the life path that I've created, or the life path character creation system, I felt like my players, they got that. And it wasn't like a story railroad, as in like, by the time you're done making characters for this, they're gonna look like this type of character. No, but they fit the spirit. We didn't play it at all. We just did the character creation for a while, but they gave me a couple of points of good feedback. I've read all your feedback and adjusted based on those things as well, and it's coming along. So that was cool. We had a good time, and then this next weekend we will play another session of the 5e based game, and then the week after that I'll be off because I'll be out of town. So it's good.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, by our backgrounds and by the episode title, that's probably here. Wait, let's see. Classic. Look how young Harrison Ford was right there. Look at it, right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right. No. Right.
The other side.
There.
There you
and
go.
that was The Spy Who Loved Me, I believe. I believe that was her. Anyway, we're going to talk about story and adventure ideas, like seeds for Achtung Cthulhu. And I know that, I mean, this may seem odd because it seems so obvious. You've said this, I've said this, like, hey, you're going to run, monsters, Achtung Cthulhu, you're going to run monsters and Nazis. Okay. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. And you are right that when it comes to explicit story seeds, there's not a whole lot. And maybe that's because they just assumed, hey, it's World War II, it's well known, people are going to come up with stuff, but we're going to help by providing a bunch of different ideas, and maybe some novel ones. I think I've got some ones that I think might be novel. I guess you'll make that decision, dear listener.
Yeah, I think we'll default mostly to you for this, since you've run it a lot and written for it, and more of the expert on the time period as well. So whereas I did some of the work last time. So
well, okay. So when you're thinking about story ideas for this, how are you conceptualizing, like the big picture, call them groupings, or you just when you start thinking story ideas for Achtung Cthulhu, you just spew separate ideas? Because I tend to think like big picture categories to sort and then line things up within those. How do you want to approach this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think makes it easier to do stuff for Achtung Cthulhu is at least the idea would be you would be working for some kind of organization. So whether that's like you're someone on the Allies, which means you've always got the thing of someone giving you a mission.
Yep.
So then that's, I mean, you don't have to stick to that. That was obviously one of the problems we said with the sci-fi thing, is that if you don't have an employer, that is that thing that's a bit more difficult. So you've actually got to think, how do you get to mission? So at least that's one thing straight out of the way. If you're struggling how to set up an Achtung Cthulhu game, well, the players should really be working for someone who is, as you would assume, is the good guys.
Yeah, and the default is, the players are working for Majestic and or Section M.
Yeah.
I think that having that ready patron, source of missions and source of support, that makes things so much easier for the GM. I think that Achtung Cthulhu over time, with recurring enemies, recurring nemesis, and through character development, you could get to a point, if you ran a longer campaign, where the players through their characters would start pushing story ideas themselves, wanting to return to things or do things. But yeah, early on, it's super easy. What I mean is, obviously, as a player and then as a character, the source of the missions and the direction, the motive force to go do something is there. That's easy. What I'm talking about is, from a GM's perspective, like, how do you have your ideas grouped? Like, when I started thinking about this episode, I thought, okay, how would I like prime up my mind to come up with ideas? And I thought, I think you could go with theater, Pacific, Europe, you go by geographic region of the war. You could go by time period, year, that is. You could also look at it by theme or general idea.
I think I'd be more likely to go from the other end, is to go right. What's the mission? What's the thing? And then, having decided what the mission's going to be, then to go right. Well, so who's the bad guy going to be? Because ideally there should be, there's a whole bunch of different bad guys. So who's the bad guy going to be? And is there a secondary or even a tertiary bad guy? And then I think I'd go where and when. I guess when only really matters if you're playing one shot, because I would have assumed that if you're not doing a one shot and you're going to play a campaign, then you need to start earlier on in sort of, probably earlier on in the war, so that you can carry on. you're going to be jumping around in time. That'd be weird. But if you're doing a one shot, then yeah, time actually becomes a thing. I guess also to some extent, time then may well affect the where, because, you know, do you want to do things when the war isn't happening in that type, in that area, or when it is happening? Because again, regardless, you would note, you know, that would make a difference of it. You'd have to consider, oh, well, actually, if this is where I want it to be and this is when it's happening, oh, actually, like that's near the front at that point. Therefore, you know, so are you behind enemy lines, or are you, you know, in a place where there's kind of nominally nothing happening depending on the time? So yeah, that makes more common. But I would start with the mission, like the you know, the brief,
the type of mission.
The type of mission.
Yeah. You actually bring up some good points before we dive into specific ideas, which we're going to do. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but I think that's well worth it. If you want, if your intention is to run you hope is to run a longer, like a campaign, not a short story arc, which you could place just about anywhere, not a one shot, obviously, but an actual campaign, you really need to start earlier in the war, depending on what your time frame is going to be. Like, will your missions take place over days or maybe a week or two? How much downtime will there be between missions? And also, how closely do you want to mirror the follow parallel, whatever, the historical events of the war? You're going to obviously have the most flexibility if you start earlier in the war. That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't actually considered it in those terms. Good thing to think about. So what's a theme? What's a theme or a mission, a type of mission, not a specific one, but a type of mission that you could throw at? Come up with something generic, and then we'll work through those other steps you just mentioned.
I don't know. I thought you had all the other ideas for this one. Go on.
Okay.
Impress me with your ideas, because I'm struggling to remember the main factions are, which is why I've got them popped up on.
Okay. So, a really typical is you could go gather intelligence. Okay. The primary mission is to go gather information. And so you're supposed to go somewhere, find out something that needs to be known, and bring it back. Okay. There's that. There's a raid where you go in and you have a specific target to destroy or disrupt. That could involve like a kidnapping. That could involve an extraction, you know, like a rescue, or, well, I guess, you know, a rescue in quotes of someone who doesn't wish to be rescued is kidnapping. So that could accompany a raid. We could put into that, so it doesn't have to be a person either, because of the setting. It could be an artifact of some sort and that's where you can spiral off into it, you know, whether it's a heist thing that you're stealing from a neutral party as opposed to the bad guys. Right. So intel gathering, or you could call it reconnaissance, raid. You could do, you know, like a longer term behind the lines sort of adventure. You could also decide to attach the Section M and or Majestic forces, like take the team and attach them to conventional forces, or have them work alongside conventional forces if you wanted to create like a bubble of the mythos, or a bubble of supernatural activity that takes place within, you know, an actual part of the war. So it's like, in a way, you could think of it as the conventional war is taking place, and there's this like festering, there's this boil of mythos / you know, whatever supernatural stuff going on. And so your characters move through, figuratively, the conventional forces and to deal with this supernatural threat that they're not equipped to deal with. So I think that could be a common one for Achtung Cthulhu.
One thing I like about doing things like this, I remember playing it was a Savage Worlds thing, which I think was like Weird War 2 or
Weird
something.
War 2.
And doing like an adventure where there was only 2 players, but they got to play with a squad. So there was like, you know, they had 5 other people they named each. But then if you throw them up against something quite nasty, you can kill a bunch of people to show how powerful the scary monster thing is without offing the players. You know, you don't often see that in like D&D, but in Achtung Cthulhu, it's very easy to go, right, you are being attached with this squad. This squad's going to this place anyway, so you're going to go with them. But when you get there, you're going to go off and do something. But then, you know, you can have some big, nasty, scary Cthulhu beast attack and just like wipe the squad out, just to kind of show, yeah, look, you can't mess with this thing. This thing's too powerful. But then you don't have to worry about killing the PCs to do it. So there are, you know, big advantages there to having a, you know, squad, or, you know, one of the squad survives and then you've got this cool NPC that gets to hang out with you, or they're traumatized. So I think there's a lot there to lean on the, you know, the fact that you are in a different setting. This isn't just a reskin D&D. You have got, you know, other people in the theater of combat with you that you can use both ways. So I think that's quite a lot of fun to have you like going alongside another, like an actual military squad kind of thing or something.
I think there's another idea that you could use with Achtung Cthulhu, called like a baseline, like mission style or type even, and that could be, and this is not a default from within the game, but I think it's entirely doable. The default is that the characters are already aware of and part of supernatural stuff.
Yeah. You
could start off with them as innocents, have them experience something, and then move into like, then because of that, because they survive, they're the only ones who can, you know, who make it work. They are then brought into Section M or Majestic. I think that's a viable approach as well, if you wanted to do that. If you want to have players, I mean, you could, if you, the GM, pitch to your players that you wanted to run like a World War II style game and you were coy about there being mythos and monsters and whatnot, you could do that, and actually you wouldn't have to ask them to suspend disbelief. But you could ask them to, if they were aware that it was Achtung Cthulhu that you were playing. That's another way you could start off.
Well, even if they did know they were going to play Achtung Cthulhu, if they knew nothing about the sort of the Cthulhu mythos or the Achtung Cthulhu parts of it, you could just, you know, and if they were happy making sort of just military or civilian characters with none of the magic stuff in, there's nothing wrong with you just doing that as a sort of a session 0 type thing. Anyway, you know, session 0.5, where we're going to see how these characters first get, you know, and again, we can go back to the squad thing, have them in a squad and the squad gets wiped out by something, and then they're captured by the, you know, one of the bad organizers, and then they escape, or they're captured, they're rescued by, you know, Majestic or Thingy 12. Now they've seen behind, and now they get inducted, and so now you can drip feed stuff to the players as their characters, rather than having to have sort of this assumed thing of like, well, he's the good, he's who's good, here's who's bad. This, you know, they can actually, so it's not a bad idea to do that, even if they, you know, particularly, I think if you've got players who know very little about sort of the mythos at all, if all they know, they've heard of the name Cthulhu and that's the limit of what they know, that's not a bad way to actually sort of start off your earlier sessions.
And if you think about it too, there are plenty of movies and books that really fit as, I don't know, warm-up material for this setting. You know, Indiana Jones. I mean, Indiana Jones, I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark is essentially, it starts off supposedly as an intel gathering that this outside contractor, Dr. Indiana Jones, Jones has been asked to do, but it very quickly turns into a combination of a retrieve the person and retrieve the thing.
Yeah,
that's what it is. That's the whole movie, and everything else just plays out like that. Even what is it? Last Crusade.
I was going to say Last Crusade's pretty much the same.
He's sent
to, we think the Germans of doing something, so we've sent someone, turns out to be your father, to go for it, and Indy goes, well, I'm going to go and look for him, and then he realized, but then, you know, then it's going to become a rescue, then that becomes then a rescue mission, an extract mission, and then it goes off into the at that point in those things, Indy always makes the decision, I'm not going to go back and report, I'm just going to sort it myself, which is dumb. I'm not going to go and report, I'm the only one who can take on the entirety of the German army. Okay,
this thing behind me, Force 10 from Navarone, is basically a raid. The classic Where Eagles Dare with Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood is as a combination of assassination, intrigue, intelligence, because they're trying to uncover moles, and also a rescue of someone. I mean, a lot of these. Anyway, let's do this. Let's pick one of those and then tease out a villain and a location and a time.
Well, I think we start with the reconnaissance one, because I think
Okay.
we've already implied that the reconnaissance one is a good starting point, but it's very easy to spiral off into something else. I think if you stick a time limit on it, you find out this really important thing. Oh no, but if we have to go back and report, because it's not modern day, you can't just get your mobile phone out and just like text your boss.
Nope.
You might not, so yes, telephones existed, but can you find one that's a secure line?
Nope.
Probably not. So you do have that thing of, right, well, if there's a time limiting factor on it, we're going to have to go and sort it ourselves. So yeah, I think we start that. So a recon mission that's then going to turn into Indiana Jones style, something else that the PCs are going to have to sort. Yeah.
So a villain, I mean, the defaults, you've got Nachtwolfe, you've got Black Sun.
Yeah.
And then you have the different Mythos Beastie factions of, Deep Ones and the Migo.
I always like the idea, because you can do of having one of the two, Nazi, German, whatever.
Yeah.
One of those is the bad guy, but then the Cthulhu things are like a complicating thing at some point.
That's a ripple.
The easy way to do the twist or the complication is to have, one of the Cthulhu things be there and to mess things up. Whether it's going to make things harder for the players or the bad guys or both is like, because
so let's make things easy. Let's just say Nachtwolfe.
Yeah.
Because I mean they're researching things, building things, testing things, or using nasty things that obviously the Allies would want to know about. So it's a reconnaissance mission to go in and find out what Nachtwolfe is up to building something.
Yeah, and then that gives you a better idea as well. When you pick which of the different enemy factions I think you pick as the main bad guy, I think then starts rooting you into what the information is going to be. So because it's Nachtwolfe and then more into sort of the ancient technology, either they're looking for a particular thing or they're already working on something, as opposed to if it was Black Sun, it's more likely to be they're doing something, they're looking for.
Let's say it's a research facility.
There we go.
So it's a research facility. And this research facility, now think about this, it could either be just a facility somewhere, or it could be a facility that is somewhere because there's something there. Yeah. Like, for example, it's sitting next to a mine where they have found like a particular type of Blauer crystal that they're using. Could be something like that. So you could put the thing anywhere you want, or you could say it's there because there's something unique and special about that location.
I think it gives us a few starting things, because we can start off with, right, we're hearing rumors about something, go to this place to find out anything. Right. So you go to a town or a village or an outpost, whatever, or maybe even a city if you're going behind them, and then there's a new research facility. Well, obviously at this point you don't know anything, knowing that there's a research facility. So then you have to go to the research facility, which is going to be, that's going to be much more involved. You're going to have to break in or find a way in or get some information. Yeah. And then, I mean, pretty much that's a good chunk of the adventure.
Yeah. I think when it comes to adventure design, and I just experienced this as I was finishing my submission for Achtung Cthulhu, is when you have a site that, and there's a reconnaissance and intel gathering or information gathering aspect to it. Like the team comes to a site, and in order to resolve that scene or set of scenes, they have to survey, they have to recon the site. That is just a bit of advice to GMs. That's a sandbox.
Yeah.
Unless you, because I think that it ought to be a sandbox, because then you're handing over to the players the responsibility and the opportunity, the excitement of figuring out how they'd go about gathering the information and planning out what they're going to do and all that. If you create that as a very linear, like traditional plot driven moment, I think that kind of sucks the potential fun out of it. So when you have this set piece place, you need, and Modiphius has done this. We've seen this in other things that they put out for Achtung Cthulhu, where you have, okay, here's GM, here's information about guard schedules. And at night there are this many people here doing this, and during the day there's this many people there doing that. That's the kind of information that you need to provide in order to have your kit ready, story kit ready to respond to how the players go. Well, what if we go over here and go over there versus over there? I think that's the most sensible approach, because otherwise you end up railroading them. But yeah, okay. So a research facility. Now here's something. It could be, I think the assumption is Nachtwolfe, it's going to be behind enemy lines, which means they have to infiltrate in, they have to be dropped in, or they have to like sneak in or get with the resistance. It could also be in a neutral country.
Yeah.
Could be in like Switzerland, or could be in Sweden. It could be in Spain. And then you could have some additional politics. It could be in parts of India. You know, there could be some additional politics and issues that pop up because it's in a neutral location. So one of the things that I've noticed, and I don't mind this, but it makes sense, that virtually, well, everything that Modiphius has put out for Achtung Cthulhu right now, either adventures or rule books, it's all Western Europe. It's all Western Europe, and it's all early war, except for Forest of Fear, which is late 44, but Western Europe. And then the I think it's Serpents and Sands, the Mediterranean one that comes out later, it comes out this calendar year. That one is in North Africa. So that's the first formal departure from Western Europe, mostly early war.
It's funny that, because the original, I know, like the original series, when it was a mixture of, Call of Cthulhu and Savage Worlds, there was definitely, I found a Fate version. I know there was a North Africa book for that. Was there? I'm not sure if there was a Pacific book.
There was one Pacific book.
I mean, one thing I find out about that, because obviously the original thing is it does stick to this Black Sun and Nachtwolfe. You think, wait a minute, once you go in the Pacific, there's not a lot of Germans in the Pacific. So
Gotta come with something else.
Are the Japanese not in on this stuff? Do they have their own? Like,
they have to be
their own. Well, they have to be, but is that a book that they could do with chucking out?
But so back right. to an idea. I mean, I think your approach of what kind of a mission, and then who's the enemy, and then where does it take place? I think if you've got those, and then, I mean, if you want to throw a twist in, I think your idea of, if you include one of the Axis factions and then one of the Mythos factions, you could use either of those as the twist.
Yeah.
Or the complicating factor. I think that's a really good way to put it, especially ones like the Migo or the deep ones whose, inscrutable, motivations and goals are inscrutable. See, for me though, and this is just, I guess, difference in how we all think. For me, I think not mission first, but I think location and time. Because for me, what I keep turning to with this game is I keep looking at the real history and finding ways to be inspired by it, to twist it and make it weird, or plug in something weird next to something that's real. So for me, I've thought, like, I think Pacific, or I think Europe, or I think the Mediterranean, home front for the US, there's one adventure for that. So I think about that. I think about place, and then I think about time period, because then that guides my mind to timelines of who and what it looked like and things like that. That's what gets it flowing for me.
That's also because you're a historian to some extent and know what's going on.
Yeah,
most
that
people
helps.
Can't start with that.
I think, okay, so riffing on this, I think that if you're interested in coming up with ideas for Achtung Cthulhu, I think those basic mission profiles, you want to call them that, I think those are great ways to start, and you could combine some of them together. Like I said, watch Raiders of the Lost Ark or Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade. They're just combinations of those things. Watch Where Eagles Dare several times, because it's great. All of those things are, you can draw from. I think I think that Western Europe, early war, I almost feel like you don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
Because I think Modiphius is going to cover it for you. So if you want to keep your missions there and then, I mean, I'm not saying why bother, but why bother? You know, personally, I'm interested in North Africa,
Yeah, me
Italy,
too.
Italy, from 43 onward. The Pacific, obviously, but that would make for a radically different campaign. I mean, I guess you could just be like, forget it. You could have your agents ping-ponging back and forth between the theaters, but I think in that case, you risk, if you wanted to run a long campaign, you risk losing opportunities for the players to keep returning to nemesis, you know, and situations and places. You prevent them from using the prior knowledge that your stories are helping them develop by ripping them out of context and moving them all over the place.
One thing you can do is you can choose to just take a massive departure from history, because obviously you've got all this magic stuff. So if we're thinking one thing, like if you think of Pacific, one advantage you suddenly got is actually, well, okay, well, you know, the Pacific went a very particular way because Japan invaded Pearl Harbor, and then, you know, you guys then went and fought across the Pacific. But what happens if it goes the other way? What happens if, you know, instead of Pearl Harbor just dropping a lot of bombs, they open a portal and Cthulhu or some big, really big nasty just steps out and just wrecked Hawaii? At that point, Japan could have attacked the west coast of America. And then you've suddenly got a very, very different thing. You can go, actually, well, we're going to do an Achtung Cthulhu campaign, which is set on the west coast of America, where the Japanese have invaded. And then now you can actually fight in America because, you know, the Japanese have the advantage of all these technology things they got through an allowance with Nachtwolfer. I don't know if you ever saw it. Oh, I'm going to forget the name.
Man in the High Castle.
Man in the High Castle. Actually, you can, if you know, take a spin off that and go, right, well, I'm going to go a bit later. I'm going to actually go set it in the, I don't know, 50s or 60s, after the Allies have lost World War II, and then you can set it in there, because actually it wouldn't take a lot of effort to turn Man in the High Castle into.
I had not considered going just gonzo on the timeline. You know, what if the Japanese make really good friends with a bunch of Pacific deep ones, and the deep ones supplement or take over? They for whatever reason, they decide to take out Hawaii. That changes things.
There are, I mean, it's a gross oversimplification, but to my mind, there was a handful of little choices, which if the choice had been different, the whole World War would have been very different. So, you know, simple thing of, if Germany hadn't attacked Russia, then I don't think they ever would have lost Europe. And likewise, if the Japanese had not attacked Pearl Harbor and brought America into, when they did, it's probably a very different story. But also, if they have the advantage of a bunch of Cthulhu deep ones to drop on Hawaii, the war probably goes quite different.
I think that, you know, I think that's a really neat idea, that you can, and this would be pulling back from any like mission and location and time and stuff. Do you want to run your Achtung Cthulhu campaign or adventures? Do you want to run them where the secret war happens as this adjunct and supplement to and subtext to the war that happens as it happened? In other words, are you going to run it as history happened, but there were these other secret things you didn't know about? Or do you want to depart from history radically, like what you just said? Do you want to run an Achtung Cthulhu campaign where the war itself goes very differently than how it went, so the secret war blows up? Because if the deep ones attack Hawaii, there's no secret war anymore. It's not secret. There's going to be a deep one eating someone on the front page of a newspaper. So
it's still not modern day, so it's still difficult because we don't have the internet, and if everyone who's in Hawaii dies, we don't, you know, no information gets out. All you maybe hear is rumors, but people would blow it off. Oh, don't be silly, they didn't use sea monsters to take Hawaii. That's ridiculous.
Hey,
Um,
there were reports into January of 42 that ships were being sunk right off the California coast. There was even a rumor that took flight in the War Department for a short period of time that the Japanese had landed troops in Mexico and were marching on. No, I'm serious. It just what we don't take into account is the poop storm of chaos and it's like when I remember very clearly when September 11th happened, that first day, especially that day itself,
I have
all
no
the
idea.
unfounded
Yeah.
rumors that flew about other things that either had happened or were happening that within a few days turned out to be not the case.
Well,
So there's
because
a
there
lot
was,
to
yeah,
that.
and
I, you know,
that's when we did have social media and the internet.
yeah. So it would
Imagine when
take
you don't
longer.
have any of that. It's just
Be better
it's
off.
chaos. You can get all kinds of it.
I I think that though as a GM, if you want to run a story, a short story arc, I think it matters less. I mean, I'm personally of the one that like don't write a bunch of world background for a one off, like unless you just want to write it because you don't
Yeah,
have anything else to
totally.
do with your time. But if you're going to run a several session story arc or you intend to run a campaign for this, your first decision should be, do I stick with the default Achtung Cthulhu assumptions of secret war staying secret by and large, or do you want to just like go nuts like what you just suggested?
I think you can kind of a subtle mix there, but I think certainly if you're not an absolute expert like you are on sort of World War II and the history of it, it would make it easy because actually I'm not going to worry about when things happen and why and the order. I'm going to start messing around with things because then if I accidentally get the dates wrong, it doesn't matter. The word,
Yeah,
the very fact that Cthulhu and all this stuff exists and these factions exist is already departing from the
that
real world
you
history.
make a good point. That's a
So
fair
if you
point.
then go a bit off it, it's not the end of the day.
I think
Um,
though that for me, when it the I get so much story inspiration for Achtung Cthulhu by looking at the real history
yeah,
and saying, what if this? Or as in, what if this? So, and I look at it from this angle of a couple of different angles, actually. One of them is, okay, so here's this through line. Here's this series of things that happened. Okay. What would happen to that series of events and those people with the introduction of Black Sun, Nachtwolf, the
yeah,
Mi-Go, whatever? Or what if we injected that into the mix? How
yeah.
would it be different?
And it's entirely possible to look at real world military operations or actual battles, or look at films like we've talked about already. I mean, like that Rogue Heroes thing is sort of really like the whole
Yeah.
formation of the SAS thing, and be able to just go, well, actually, where can I throw some Cthulhu into
Yeah.
this, where you know it's getting the flavor of the Cthulhu without massively changing it, or actually, doing a lot more. And it is worth pointing out, you can actually just have the Cthulhu guys be the bad guys. It can
Yeah.
be about the cultists. And that's like, I think if you were wanting to stick to sort of the secret war, but you want to set it in, for example, in America or in Britain, and you're thinking, well, actually, it's not really realistic to have tons of Black Sun and tons of Nachtwolfer guys operating in countries that were never
Yeah.
invaded, then we'll go down the Cthulhu route. There's nothing stopping you just basically having, we'll have less of the army thing and having more, whereas that's the time period, and we have the Cthulhu things and so on. Of course, at that point, you're just kind of playing.
Well, and there's Modiphius published an adventure that takes place in London and around London, where during the Blitz, actually, with homegrown like fifth column cultist, anti-monarchists
Yeah.
who are also Cthulhu aficionados. Um, hey, before we wrap, what I would like to do, because I think, golly, Achtung Cthulhu is just it's so ripe for so many different cool things because World
Yeah.
War II was just so big. Like you can never, the nesting doll never ends when it comes to stories of the Second World War. So I want to throw out some just bits and pieces to get people thinking. Places, the CBI theater, China, Burma, India, totally overlooked, ignored. Yeah, a backwater, but important. Almost every theater had some kind of importance. So China, Burma, India, you could place. You would have to then come up with likely because you'd be involving the Japanese and the Chinese, you'd have to figure out what's their stake in mythos and creepy stuff. You know, do they have their own black sun that's just called something else?
I mean, I think that would be if you're trying to make it easy for yourself, just have an equivalent to the black
Yeah,
sun and
you
the
could do that.
Tulsa, and just look up names,
Yep.
use Google Translate and find some cool names.
I mean, think about this. If this Blauer crystal stuff is out there, it's almost like early atomic weapons research. It's like when the theories are out there, different folks are going to start looking into it. So yeah, you could just come up with Japanese, Chinese, whatever equivalents, and go from there. So the CBI theater, if you want to have like steamy jungles and rot and things like that, that could be a really a cool place to do it. The adventure that I wrote that is supposed to be out in May is what I've been told, takes place in the Pacific, early in the war, Pacific, on an island. So those kinds of things. And the nice thing I think, at least for looking for inspiration, is that especially in the American campaigns across the Pacific, you know, you have these battles that take place at specific. I mean, an island it's like your perfect closed cell or closed system. It's an island, literally. So looking at the different the battles across the Central Pacific, and then also if you really wanted to like do like nasty, awful fighting and whatnot, things like Guadalcanal and New Guinea, those places, the Philippines.
Yeah.
I know they're coming out with the North Africa book later this year, and it's big, and it is it's earlier in the war, but it covers a lot. I mean, there's an adventure in it, there's a campaign in it, but there's also a lot of like location information. So that's in the offing already. I don't think that's something that, you know, obviously, yeah, sink time in it if you want to, but if you're thinking like, is it worth you doing it? It's probably not, because they're going to do it. I think Italy could be really interesting because you've got, now, I don't know what the status of Call of Cthulhu is.
Yeah, good.
But maybe as the stories and the ideas for that begin to you know, coalesce and clarify, well, I mean, Italy used to be the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Ruins, roads, you know, who knows what you could dredge up from the past to dump on people in Italy. If you wanted to go a route with more, if you wanted to involve something that seemed more like classic monsters, which I suppose probably for some people the idea of classic style monsters, like non-mythos monsters, might seem like a bitter pill if you're playing Achtung Cthulhu. Some people might just broaden it and be like horror in World War II. You could go into the Balkans.
Yeah. Meet Dracula.
Yep. You could have a vampire story. That would work. I've toyed with the idea of a naval story. I don't know what kind of legs that would have for time, as to like how much play you could get out of that. What type of ship?
I think if you're in the Pacific, where you've got lots of think islands, and then you have the deep ones that essentially are coming from underwater, I think it makes it easier. There's you know, the ways of doing that, or just, you know, yeah, actually Mediterranean is difficult because everyone just gets blown up. I
think the Atlantic would be tough because so much of it is convoys and things like just going back and forth across the ocean. That would be, and there's really not much out there. I
can see doing it in the Pacific, where there are lots and lots of very small islands.
Yep.
Or actually just doing something very bizarre where you're just on sort of one ship and I don't know, stuff keeps happening on it. But I can't see that being a long campaign.
Yeah, I would put this in the Gonzo category, but if that's your flavor, that's cool. You could have some kind of a, I don't know, like Section M / Majestic has a ship, like a, you know, like a Nautilus, like a Captain Nemo type of you know, special ship that goes around and you know, kicks mythos ass and things like that, like underwater. And you would really go Gonzo with that. Homefront, they've put out, like I said, there are at least 2 adventures that take place one in Scotland and then one in London that are already out. There's one that takes place in the Midwestern United States. I've had a baseball game. I have it, but I have not read it in detail. And then there's another one that takes place up at some like listening station, I think in Canada, which gives me the Thing vibes. That's what seems to be coming off of that. So yeah, don't be afraid of it doesn't necessarily have to be where all the tanks and the planes are.
Yeah, one thing I was going to sort of point out is that, I mean, it's semi-obvious, but I think a lot of people forget, particularly if you come from 5e, where you expect to have these sort of, we've talked about balance, but most time, as one of the other ways of looking at balance about is, do you have a good mix of skills? So in D&D, you have a wizard that can do a lot of damage, you have a fighty guy, a tank guy, and you need someone who can heal. Now you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff in Cthulhu, but what you do need to consider is, do I have skills that will be simple stuff? If I'm going to do a thing set behind enemy lines, can my entire party speak German?
Yeah.
Or the language that you're going to be in and be impersonating. It's going to be a bit awkward if you're going to go, right, we're going to go behind enemy lines. This guy speaks German, but the other 3 people in the party are all Americans and can be no accents whatsoever. Do you have guys that can do this? Don't do a thing where you're going to be doing recon if your guys are all sort of, I don't know, either straight up military shooty people, or like they all do magic, or they're all researchers and none of them can do the stealth stuff. So that's one awkward thing, where if you have a mix of different skills, so like this guy's a really good commando guy, and this guy does magic and he's a researcher. Well, the magic research guy is probably useless at doing the stealthy into someone else's base things. You do need to look at what your players have chosen as their party when you
That's a really good point, that if you, especially if you're going to approach Achtung Cthulhu episodically, you really need to, I mean, unless you just want to, story-wise, you could just throw it out the window and say, well, you're the only agents in the quadrant, you're the only agents in the sector, as to pull a line from Star Trek. But I think that you set your players up for failure when, I want to make the arcane researcher and he's on a commando raid, and there's no reason for him to be there because there's no arcane research to do, because what you really need to do is go blow up the Blauer crystal death ray cannon. Like, you don't need the university professor at a thing like that. So I think that's where, if you wanted to run a campaign, you need to do your session 0 and have them build characters that make sense, where at least there's overlap with the types of missions you want to make, or that over time they seek to develop the skills that enable them to fit at least to some proficiency in different.
I think another thing you do is say, right, we're going to actually start with more skilled people. So let's have a base assumption that everyone has a certain amount of military training. So whether that guy is a university researcher, but he's got military training. Well, I mean, Indy doesn't have military training, but like, he's clearly quite handy in a fight. The guy can shoot a gun and he can fight and use a whip, and he can do everything. He's like James Bond, but with a better hat. And by the same thing, you could have a party like, right, everyone is either going to be, they're civilians but with military training, or they're military people, but they have, this guy's got a bit of magic, this guy's done some research, this guy speaks, or there's nothing wrong with starting with a higher level of competency.
You could handle that by taking a look at the different templates, for the archetypes and I forget off the top of my head, but like, you've got your background, whatever, you have the different steps in the life path, and you could take a look at a few of those and take some inspiration and say, okay, I mean, if you are the egghead and you've been jumped into Majestic's not just going to say, here, put these boots on and jump out of a plane, you egghead. It's not going to happen. They're going to put you through, like, when a dentist joins the Navy, they teach the person how to march and wear the uniform, kind of okay. So you put them through some kind of a ruggedization program. Here's your 4-week basic training sort of thing, egghead. And what you could do then is, you could supplement, like, take the number of points that you give to the egghead characters and then give those to the more traditional military characters to beef them up, so that they're all on more of an even keel to be able to handle a broader range of missions. That's a really good idea.
So yeah.
All right. And here's a suggestion, and I'll put a link. If you want to read, I wouldn't say it's the best single volume history of World War II, but it's the best for what it seeks to do. It's a book called A Short History of World War II by a historian named James Stokesbury. I'll put a link to that book in the notes. It's like 350 pages. I mean, which is a stunningly short volume to cover the whole war. But from the top level, it does a good job, and I think the author has a decent voice. It's not anodyne and nasally and boring. He tells a good story. And you end up getting the bigger picture with all the major component parts. Like, if you're an aficionado or a fanboy or, someone, a buff of World War II, you will learn things from this book, I'm sure, or be reminded of things. And if you're just a casual fan of the Second World War and you'd want to learn more about it to give you some ideas for this game, I suggest reading the book. There's also a website called militaryhistoryonline.com that has oodles of community sourced articles. Most of them are pretty good, categorized by time period, topic, and war. So you can go in and find lots of things about Second World War stuff on that site for free. I'll put links to both of those. Sound good?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for listening. You can visit our show's homepage at anchor.fm/fluffncrunch. That's FLUFFNCRUNCH. We would really appreciate feedback and reviews on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to this on. Thanks so much.